Something that we were talking about a little bit earlier in the show, actually, is a chronic housing shortage in New Zealand. Well, actually, not just earlier today. This is a topic which we keep coming back to because it's a problem that we don't seem to be able to solve as a society. We don't seem to have the political will to do what it is needed in order for every New Zealander to have safe, affordable housing. An organisation very much on the coalface of that issue is the Salvation Army. Joining me now is Ana Ika. She is part of the Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit. Kia ora. Thanks for your time today.
Mole Andrew, thanks for having me.
This is a tough nut to crack. Honestly, the housing issue. Governments come and go. The problem seems to be getting worse, not better, despite houses being built and, Kāinga Ora being New Zealand's largest landlord. That's an issue for another day. Before the House at the moment, though, there's an amendment bill open for submissions, the Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill. A bit of a mixed bag, be fair to say.
Yeah, it's I guess it's one of the levers the government's trying to, pull in regards to trying to address our housing crisis. So I guess the purpose of the bill is to try and alleviate or increase the supply to rental properties. But the lever that they're trying to pull is alleviating landlords and the restrictions and regulations and safeguards that are there for tenants by loosening the rules around landlords so that there are more rental properties in the rental property market. And so I guess that's kind of the gist of where this bill is going. Basically what it's doing is it's sort of undoing a lot of the safeguards that are in place to protect just not even vulnerable tenants, just tenants in
Just
general.
tenants generally. Yeah, although unintended consequence, I think, of the previous government's legislation, landlords went, well, it's not worth me doing this anymore. I won't be a landlord. I'll have Airbnb. And you've got properties that are sitting empty in some parts of New Zealand because the landlords aren't breaking even. And it's better for tax purposes for them to be an Airbnb operator than it is to be a landlord. I mean, that wasn't the intention of the legislation, but perhaps an unintended consequence that this legislation is attempting to undo. Would that be fair?
Well, kind of, but not really.
Yep.
There's no proven evidence that shows by loosening these safeguards for tenants or for the rental property market that would make a difference in regards to what they're trying to achieve by increasing supply. And so we saw earlier on in this year around, tax breaks for landlords. And now here again, we see sort of another lever that's trying to alleviate the pressures for landlords. And so these legislation changes doesn't necessarily mean that will mean cheaper rentals, that would mean better options and support for tenants. And so it's kind of just changing the rules without necessarily knowing that this is actually going to make a difference for the many New Zealanders that rent in New Zealand.
There is, I suppose, because this is a bill which is at the submission stage, there is opportunity for us to have our say. And I think this is one of the key points, Anna. It's all very well to be shocked and appalled and go, gosh, isn't it terrible, the housing crisis? Somebody should do something about that. But when there's a bill like this, which is open for submission, if you like the bill or if you hate it, an opportunity for you to have your say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really key. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today about this particular bill, because it is still open for submissions. And for those that kind of want to know a little bit more about the bill, what it's planning to do is trying to remove the 90-day notice. So landlords don't need to give notice before they give those 90 days. It's restricting, it's lessening some of the times that landlords need to give notice to their tenants to be able to move them out of their properties. And I think that there's one good thing in this bill, and I think is the only one good thing that is in there, is that those that suffer from family violence can end their tenancies straight away. And so that's something that we are going to support purely because we see a lot of people that are impacted by family violence that continue to stay in these dangerous situations purely because there's nowhere else for them to go and they're
Yeah.
not able to break their tenancies, and that's going to create an extra financial burden on them. But ultimately, that's probably the only one thing that we would support. Every other aspect, every other clause of the bill for people that like to look at the nitty gritty of the bill, will actually do a lot more harm to tenants than it does good. Yeah.
Well, I mean, hey,
So yeah, really important if we would have their say.
exactly,
Is ultimately what I'm trying to get to. Yeah.
no, totally, and good to find the silver lining, because what an awful situation for people to be in, to stay in an abusive relationship where there's violence and violence against them and their children, or to become homeless. I mean, that is definitely between a rock and a hard place. Also hitting the headlines in Wellington this week, the case of some rough sleepers, and again trying to find the silver lining because of earthquake damage. Lots of places available for rough sleepers, and at this time of the year they're moving inside, and unfortunately, tragically, an accident happened to somebody in that situation. This in the same week where there's been comments about the some of the perks that MPs have to be able to, get a subsidy to pay themselves rent for houses that they own in Wellington. I mean, the optics are terrible. This seems, on the surface, blatantly unfair, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I just want to go back to the last point we were talking about,
Yeah.
Andrew, the importance of everyday New Zealanders to have a say, because ultimately our MPs are in those positions to be able to, enforce these laws. But if they're using taxpayer dollars on top of I think the average salary for MP is about 160,000, and that I think the average salary for a New Zealander is about 80,000, so that's more than double. I just highlights how do we ensure that these MPs have the best have the needs of tenants in mind when they're using these tax dollars to be able to pay off second homes or third homes even. I mean, I think the average for an MP at the moment is they own 2.2 homes, and so that just highlights that that a lot of them don't necessarily will understand the challenges that everyday tenants will face. And so it's really important for us to be able to have our say and advocate for the challenges that we face as tenants in this housing catastrophe that we're facing. But I just want to highlight, Andrew, that it is well within the rules that these MPs have those perks. I think it's between 34,000 and 52,000 that they can access out of town Wellingtonians can access for accommodation when they're in Wellington for work. But yeah, just because it's there doesn't necessarily mean that it's like our tax dollars is also paying for your mortgage on top of the already large salary that you have been given by taxpayers. So yeah, just wanting to ensure that the lives of everyday New Zealanders that that don't even make 80,000 a year, or that are in high price rentals, that those voices are heard when these types of legislations are being pushed through Parliament.
Now, I think this highlights something, though. If the average politician owns 2.5 houses, and let's be clear on this, I'm not taking political sides. That is across the board. That is just about all political parties represented in this statistic. It just goes to show that most politicians are landlords. They're not renters. Their vested interest is for the rules and regulations to be easier for landlords. If they're not renting the property to themselves, they are renting it to somebody else who will be paying their mortgage that they've just reduced the tax on in that regard. So in terms of vested interest, politicians of all stripes, for the most part, it would seem, are the landlords in our society. I'm not sure if there's a politician in Parliament who is generation rent, and hey, if so, the government's, the taxpayers are subsidising them anyway, right?
Yeah, so it's quite a when we're looking at the housing catastrophe, when we're thinking about, I guess, the significant challenges that the families that we support face, particularly in the private rental market. Like we've seen families, move multiple times, and we've seen families that have lived in homes for like 10 to 20 of years as as renting these properties, and then they get moved out and these houses get refurbished, put up back on the market, and
Yeah.
the families that were there for like paying that mortgage for 10 to 20 years can't afford to get back into their house. And so there's a lot of displacement and a lot of challenges in regards to tenants across Aotearoa. And so ensuring that, like you mentioned, Andrew, that the politicians that are in charge of making these rules, do so for the welfare and the benefit of tenants, not just the landlords. But in our view, we strongly think this amendment bill will be in favour of landlords and not necessarily safeguarding tenants.
At the same time, just wanting to put some balance in it, because this was something we were talking about earlier in the program. I know that there are good landlords, there are good organisations, there are Christian organisations such as the Salvation Army, such as the Anglican Wellington Diocese, that are doing fantastic stuff tackling this problem. So it's not just hey, let's point the finger at the government and say, oh gosh, this is the government's problem to fix. This is a huge problem which will take all of society to put the effort and energy and resources into. Anna, thank you for the work that you guys do at the Salvation Army, advocating for people who are in very tough situations at the moment. Thanks for joining us today.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.